What you are about to discover was not erased by accident. It was erased because it revealed a truth so powerful, the system that governs our world could not control it. For 2,000 years, a story has been etched into the stone of civilization, a story of a broken woman, a penitent sinner whose only grace was to be forgiven. They gave you this version, a fractured reflection in a dark mirror, because it served their purpose. It was a story of control, of hierarchy, of a spirituality where the feminine was something to be tamed, purified, and ultimately subjugated. But what if the dust of ages has settled not on a tomb, but on a throne? What if the voice they tried to silence was not a whisper of shame, but a song of creation? Today, we peel back the layers of this carefully constructed lie. We do not seek to rewrite history, but to remember it. We uncover the story of a queen, a high priestess, and a mother. Have you ever felt it? A deep, resonant hum beneath the surface of the official narratives, a sense of profound incompleteness. It is an echo in the quiet chambers of the heart, a feeling that a vital piece of our collective soul has been carefully removed from the great tapestry of human history. This feeling is not an illusion. It is an ancestral memory, a ghost of a truth so fundamental that its absence has left a wound in the world, a deep imbalance that we all experience but struggle to name. The story of Mary Magdalene, as it has been told, is the epicenter of this wound. They painted her as a shadow at the foot of a cross, but her presence there, when the most devoted of men had fled in fear, was not the act of a minor character. It was the vigil of a co-creator, the steadfastness of the other half of a sacred whole. Why was she, above all others, the first to witness the resurrection? Because some truths can only be perceived by a heart that never lost faith, a wisdom that was never severed from its source. The erasure was a strategic act of immense consequence, carried out in the silent, candlelit halls of power where dogma was forged and history was written by the victors. The architects of a new world order understood a dangerous truth, a spirituality that honors the sacred feminine as an equal partner in creation cannot be controlled by a male-only priesthood. A lineage grounded in a sacred marriage, in the union of spirit and flesh, heaven and earth, undermines the very foundation of an institution built on celibacy and a distant patriarchal god. To consolidate their power, they had to sever Western consciousness from its feminine half. And so, the Magdalene, the apostle to the apostles, the bearer of a deeper gnosis, had to be neutralized. With a single sermon, a whisper of propaganda that echoed for centuries, they conflated her with the sinner, burying her authority under a mountain of shame. It was the most successful character assassination in human history, and its purpose was to hide a legacy that would have changed everything. But truth, like a river, will always find its way to the sea. While empires rose and fell, and councils debated the nature of God, this forbidden knowledge did not die. It simply went into hiding, protected in the sanctuaries far from the reach of Rome. It survived in the whispers of Gnostic sages, who wrote of her as the companion, the one who understood the deepest mysteries. It was sealed in clay jars and buried beneath the desert sands of Egypt, waiting for a future generation to find the keys. And most profoundly, it was carried like a sacred flame to the mist-shrouded highlands of Ethiopia, a bastion of one of the oldest, most uninterrupted Christian traditions on earth. Here, in this ancient ark of faith, isolated by geography and theology, a different story was preserved, a story untouched by the revisions and redactions of empire. Within their holy books and oral traditions, the memory of a sacred bloodline, of a different kind of royalty, was kept, alive, shielded from a world that was not yet ready to hear it. This journey is not for the faint of heart. It is a pilgrimage back to the source, a quest to uncover a truth that has been waiting patiently in the shadows for the moment of its return. This revelation is more than a historical correction. It is an activation. It is a key turning in a lock deep within your own consciousness, an invitation to reclaim a forgotten part of your own soul. The suppression of the Magdalene is the story of the suppression of the divine feminine within every human being. Her return is the signal of a great rebalancing, a healing of the wound that has kept humanity in a state of spiritual separation for millennia. If you have always felt that there was more to the story, if the ache of that missing piece resonates within you, then you were meant to find this message. If you are ready to uncover the truths that were buried in the dark, subscribe now and join this journey into the light. The time for silence is over. The time for remembering is now. To understand the depth of this hidden knowledge, we must first walk through the silent theater where the illusion was staged. The official history is a grand cathedral built of carefully selected stones, its walls echoing with a single authorized chant. Within this structure, Mary Magdalene is a side chapel, a small alcove dedicated to repentance, adorned with the symbols of a sinner redeemed. This was the narrative forged in the flickering lamplight of scriptoriums by ink-stained fingers that chose which gospels would become law and which would be condemned to the fire. They needed a world of clear hierarchies: God in heaven, his representatives on earth, and humanity below, seeking forgiveness. A broken woman saved by grace fit perfectly into this model. But what of the stones they cast aside? What of the voices they buried beneath the floor? The very questions that arise from their own story betray a deeper truth. Why was she, the supposed penitent, the one who stood firm at the execution when the chosen men scattered in fear? Why was she the first witness, the one entrusted with the most important news in human history? These are not the actions of a peripheral character. They are the footprints of a queen, walking through a story that was later claimed by kings who wrote her out of her own legacy. The first cracks in this monolithic wall appear not in Rome, but in the shifting sands of the Egyptian desert. In 1945, near the town of Nag Hammadi, a discovery was made that sent a tremor through the foundations of orthodoxy. Sealed in a clay jar for nearly 16 centuries were scrolls of a different kind of gospel, texts that spoke not of sin and repentance, but of gnosis, of direct inner knowing. In these forgotten scriptures, the Magdalene is not a shadow, she is a star. The Gospel of Philip speaks of her as the companion of the Nazarene, the one he would often kiss, the one he loved more than all the other disciples. The Gospel of Mary portrays her as the preeminent apostle, the one who received secret teachings, a revelation too profound for the male disciples to comprehend. These were not the writings of heretics. They were the last echoes of a suppressed lineage of wisdom, a testament to a spiritual partnership so powerful it had to be erased. They are fragments of an ancestral memory, proving that another version of the story did not just exist, but was once central to the entire spiritual mission. Why was this truth so dangerous that it had to be buried in the desert, entrusted to the silence of the earth itself? The danger was not in the woman, but in what she represented. The sacred feminine as an equal and essential half of the divine. The conflict at the heart of this mystery is a battle between two visions of reality. One, embodied by the Magdalene, is a vision of union, of the hieros gamos, or sacred marriage, where spirit and flesh, masculine and feminine, heaven and earth are not in opposition, but are partners in creation. In this vision, divinity is not a distant authority, but a living presence, birthed into the world through sacred union. The other vision, which became the bedrock of a new empire, required separation. It needed a celibate, all-male priesthood to act as intermediaries between a remote, patriarchal god and a flawed humanity. A sacred marriage, a wife, and most threateningly, a child, would have made this power structure impossible. The living embodiment of integrated divinity, a bloodline carrying a sacred frequency, could not be controlled by an institution. And so the architects of this new world order made a calculated decision. They could not erase her presence, so they would poison her identity. They would turn the high priestess into a prostitute, the bearer of gnosis into a vessel of sin, and the sacred partner into a cautionary tale. This act of spiritual assassination was not a slow, accidental drift into misunderstanding. It was a precise and targeted campaign. For centuries, the whispers of the Gnostic texts were drowned out by the rising chorus of a standardized faith, a process that crystallized at councils like Nicaea, where theological debates became political decrees. But the final, definitive blow was struck in the year 591, from the most powerful pulpit in the Western world. Pope Gregory the Great delivered a sermon that would echo for 1,500 years, a single speech in which he deliberately and officially fused the identity of Mary Magdalene with the unnamed sinful woman from the Gospel of Luke and with Mary of Bethany. With the weight of his authority, he cemented her new identity in the consciousness of the West. It was a masterstroke of propaganda. In one fell swoop, the apostle to the apostles was demoted, her authority erased, and her legacy buried under a mountain of shame. The system had found its perfect antagonist for her, not a demon or a rival god, but a story so pervasive and so powerful that it would become more real than the truth it was designed to conceal. But while Rome was busy building its empire of faith, rewriting its histories, and burning the books that contradicted its narrative, that ancient wisdom did not perish. Truth, when suppressed, does not vanish. It simply flows underground, seeking sanctuary in places the empire cannot reach. It traveled on the desert winds with scattered Gnostic communities, and it found its most enduring refuge in a land of mist-shrouded mountains, a place protected by geography and fierce independence, the highlands of Ethiopia. Here, in this ancient kingdom, Christianity took root in a form that predated the Roman councils. The Ethiopian Orthodox Tewahedo Church became an ark, a living vessel preserving a stream of tradition untouched by the revisions and redactions of the West. Isolated and self-contained, it kept alive a canon of scripture and an oral tradition that held keys the rest of the world had long forgotten. It was a fortress of memory, a place where a different story was not only remembered, but revered, waiting for a time when the world would be ready to listen. Within this protected sanctuary, the ground was already fertile for the preservation of this specific truth. The spiritual and cultural identity of Ethiopia is inextricably linked to a sacred bloodline. Their most sacred text, the Kebra Nagast, or the Glory of Kings, chronicles the story of the Queen of Sheba and King Solomon and the birth of their son, Menelik I, who would bring the Ark of the Covenant to Ethiopia. This is not just a myth for them. It is the foundational truth of their nation, the source of their spiritual authority and their royal lineage. A culture that defines itself by its connection to a holy bloodline, one that sees the union of masculine and feminine royalty as the very source of its covenant with God, would not see the idea of a sacred marriage and a child as blasphemous. On the contrary, they would see it as the ultimate fulfillment of a divine pattern. They had the framework, the cultural memory, and the spiritual language to understand and protect a truth that the West had been conditioned to see as heresy. And so the conflict is drawn. On one side, an empire built on a story of control, a narrative of a broken world in need of a distant male authority. On the other, a forgotten legacy preserved in the high mountains, a truth about balance, union, and a sacred lineage that continues the work of creation on earth. The whispers from the Egyptian desert and the steadfast traditions of the Ethiopian highlands are beginning to speak to each other across the centuries, weaving together the torn fragments of a story that was deliberately broken in two. The mystery is no longer if a different truth existed, but how it managed to survive in such pristine form, so far from the centers of power that sought to destroy it. What did the guardians of this knowledge in Ethiopia protect for all these millennia? Was this truth kept alive by chance, or was it being held in trust for a future moment of awakening? We stand now at the threshold of that sanctuary, at the edge of this great revelation. The next step takes us inside to listen to the story that has been waiting. The story that was preserved does not lie on the surface. It is not found in the grand, sunlit halls of a basilica, but in the cool, earth-scented quiet of rock-hewn churches, carved like wombs into the mountains of Lalibela. It breathes in the ancient cadence of Ge'ez, a liturgical language that has carried these secrets on its vibrations since before the Roman Empire dictated the terms of faith. The Ethiopian Orthodox Tewahedo Church is not merely a branch of Christianity. It is a primary root, drawing its life from a source that predates the councils and creeds of the West. Their biblical canon is a library of forgotten truths, containing texts like the Book of Enoch and the Book of Jubilees, scriptures that the architects of orthodoxy cast into the flames. This is the first proof, the existence of a sealed vessel, an ark of scripture that sailed untouched through the storms of revisionism, carrying a cargo of knowledge the rest of the world was forced to forget. Within this expanded worldview, the stories are not flattened into simple moral lessons. They retain their mystical depth, their numerological significance, and the echoes of a far more ancient wisdom. Within these monastic libraries, kept in leather-bound manuscripts penned by hands long returned to dust, are chronicles and interpretations that speak of a second sacred lineage. While the Kebra Nagast lays the foundation, establishing the cultural and spiritual importance of the Solomonic bloodline, the oral traditions passed down by the cloistered monks, the true guardians of the inner mysteries, complete the story. They speak not in plain language, but in the allegorical tongue of the mystic. They speak of the second Eve, who, unlike the first, did not lead humanity into exile, but birthed the path of its return. They speak of the flight to the south, a journey that mirrored the original flight of the Holy Family to Egypt, but which continued, following the life-giving Nile deep into the heart of Africa, seeking refuge in the one kingdom that could recognize and protect a sacred queen and her royal child. This was not a story written for the masses. It was a truth encoded in genealogies, whispered in commentaries on the Song of Songs, and woven into the intricate iconography of their art, where the dark-faced Madonna is not only the mother of the Nazarene, but the archetypal Black Madonna, the symbol of Sophia, the hidden wisdom that births divinity into the world. This hidden knowledge was never entrusted to paper alone. Ink can fade, and scrolls can burn. The most profound truths are carried in the living breath of an unbroken lineage. For centuries, the esoteric heart of the Ethiopian tradition has been protected by its lay priests and scribes, the Deteras. These are not simple clerics. They are masters of a dual knowledge, trained in both the exoteric rites of the church and the esoteric wisdom that underpins it. They are healers, astronomers, and keepers of the oral law, a stream of ancestral memory that flows from master to apprentice in the hushed quiet of the monastery walls. It is through them that the story of the Magdalene and her child survived, not as a historical footnote, but as a core mystical teaching. They understood what the West had forgotten, that the divine plan was not about a singular event in the past, but about the continuation of a sacred frequency on earth. a frequency carried in a bloodline and protected by a community that had never bowed its knee to a foreign emperor or a distant pope. Why was this truth guarded so fiercely, passed only from mouth to ear for 2 millennia? Because it was a living key, a power that could only be entrusted to those who understood its sacred purpose. The journey itself is another layer of proof, a trail of breadcrumbs left across the ancient world. The canonical story tells of a flight to Egypt to escape a king, but this was merely the first leg of a much longer pilgrimage. After the crucifixion, the greatest threat to the new faith was not its persecution, but the potential capture and destruction of its living legacy. The Magdalene, carrying the future, would have been the most valuable and vulnerable person in the world. The path south was the only logical escape. It was a well-traveled route, alive with trade and pilgrimage, dotted with communities of Therapeuti and Gnostics, spiritual cousins who would have recognized her for who she was and offered sanctuary. From the spiritual melting pot of Alexandria, the path leads up the Nile, deeper into Africa, towards the Kushite kingdoms and the highlands of Ethiopia. This was not a flight into the unknown, but a return to an ancient ally. The connection between Jerusalem and Ethiopia, forged in the time of Solomon and Sheba, was never broken. It was a lifeline, a pre-established path to safety, a journey to a kingdom whose very identity was built upon the protection of a sacred bloodline. Perhaps the most profound evidence is not written in any book, but is encoded in the central mystery of the Ethiopian faith itself, their unwavering belief that they are the guardians of the Ark of the Covenant. To the Western mind, this is a historical claim about a lost artifact, but to the mystic, the symbolism is the true revelation. What is the Ark, if not a sacred vessel built to house the living presence of God on earth? And what is a high priestess, a holy woman consecrated to the divine, if not a living, breathing Ark? The Ethiopian reverence for the Ark of the Covenant is the macrocosmic reflection of their hidden reverence for the Magdalene. The sacred womb that carried the divine child was the ultimate fulfillment of the Ark's purpose. It was the moment the divine presence was no longer housed in a box of acacia wood and gold, but in human flesh and blood. Their guardianship of the Ark is a symbolic testament to their secret guardianship of the bloodline. They protected the symbol because they were protecting the reality it represented. Can you feel the resonance of this parallel, the beautiful poetic symmetry of this hidden truth? And so the evidence forms a constellation, a pattern of light in the long night of history. It is a collection of suppressed scriptures, a living oral tradition, a plausible and logical journey of refuge, and a profound symbolic parallel that lies at the very heart of a nation's soul. This is not a conspiracy theory born of modern fantasy. It is an ancient wisdom, a forgotten legacy that survived because it was moved from a land of shifting empires to a kingdom of eternal mountains. It was a truth held in trust, shielded from a world that had chosen the path of control over the path of union. The question is not whether this knowledge could have survived. The real mystery is why it is beginning to surface now. What is it about this moment in our history that is calling this sacred memory out of its mountain sanctuary and into the light of our collective awareness? This knowledge does not return by chance. It does not surface like a random artifact unearthed by a curious archaeologist. Its re-emergence is a sign, an event timed not by the calendars of men, but by the great slow breathing of the cosmos itself. For 2,000 years, this truth has been a seed held in the cold, dark earth of a protected mountain sanctuary, waiting for the precise spiritual conditions to germinate. That time is now. We are living in an age of profound awakening, a time when the carefully constructed walls of old paradigms are beginning to crumble, not from external attack, but from an internal pressure, a deep, collective yearning for wholeness. The return of this story is a signal flare, fired from the past into the heart of the present, announcing that the long winter of imbalance is coming to an end, and a new season of consciousness is ready to be born. But this revelation is not a distant echo from an ancient mountain. It is a vibration that resonates deep within the chambers of your own being. It is a memory stirring in your own blood. Have you ever felt it? A sense of profound incompleteness, a feeling that a vital part of your own spirit has been exiled, leaving you to navigate a world that honors only half of who you are. The suppression of the Magdalene is not merely a historical injustice, it is the great foundational trauma of the Western soul. Her story, twisted from a queen into a penitent, is the story of how intuition was subjugated by dogma, how the wisdom of the body was deemed sinful by the sterile intellect of institutions, and how the sacred life-giving power of the feminine was taught to fear itself. Her exile is your exile. Her silencing is the silencing of that deep inner voice that you have been taught to ignore. This wound is the great schism within the human soul, the artificial divide between the sacred and the mundane, the spirit and the flesh. An entire civilization has been built upon this fracture, a world that elevates logic above feeling, control above surrender, and power above love. This imbalance is the source of our collective dis-ease, the root of a spiritual hunger that no amount of material gain or dogmatic belief can satisfy. The system that erased the Magdalene did so because it understood that a balanced human being, one in whom the sacred marriage of masculine and feminine is made whole, is a sovereign being, a soul that has reclaimed its feminine wisdom, its connection to the earth, to the cycles of life, and to the voice of the heart, cannot be ruled by external dogma. It is guided from within. To hear this story, to truly allow its frequency to enter your consciousness, is therefore an act of profound spiritual rebellion. It is an activation. This knowledge is not passive information to be stored in the mind. It is a living key, a harmonic code designed to unlock the dormant parts of your own soul. It is a frequency that calls to the forgotten parts of your being, awakening an ancestral memory that has been sleeping for generations. This is why its return is so potent and why it was guarded so fiercely. It is a truth that does not just inform, it transforms. It is a revelation that begins a process of inner alchemy, the sacred work of reuniting the severed parts of yourself, of healing the wound that has kept you feeling separate from your own divinity. What is changing inside you as you hear these words? The rising of this truth from the earth is a mirror to the rising of the divine feminine from within the collective human psyche. It is no accident that as the old, patriarchal structures begin to show their cracks, this memory pushes its way into the light. It is the counterbalance, the medicine for our time. For centuries, we have been told a story of a distant sky father god, a spirituality of ascension that sought to escape the feminine realms of earth, body, and emotion. The Magdalene story returns us to the ground. It reminds us that divinity is not something to be reached for in the heavens, but something to be birthed here and now, in the sacred vessel of the human body and the living temple of the earth. Her legacy is the path of embodiment, the forgotten way of sacred union. And so the tension rises not just in the historical mystery, but in the spiritual stakes of its revelation. This is no longer a simple inquiry into what might have happened 2,000 years ago. It has become a deeply personal quest for the missing piece of our own identity. The truth preserved in Ethiopia is more than a historical record. It is a blueprint for our own becoming, a map back to the wholeness that was stolen from us. The guardians of this knowledge were not simply protecting a secret about the past. They were preserving a sacred technology for the future. They were holding in trust a power so profound, It was believed it could heal the world, but only when the world was ready to receive it. We now stand at the precipice of that revelation. We have walked the path of its suppression and felt its echo in our own souls. We understand why it was hidden and why it is returning now. The stage is set. The deep, resonant hum of this returning truth is growing louder, becoming a song that the heart recognizes even if the mind cannot yet comprehend it. But the guardians in the mist-shrouded highlands did not just protect an idea, an allegory, or a spiritual concept. They were guarding more than a memory. They were guarding a name, a living continuation. The final layer of this mystery does not simply tell you the secret. It speaks its name. The air grows thin in these high places, in the quiet heart of the Ethiopian mountains where the sky feels closer than the earth. Here, the guardians of this ancient wisdom did not build their sanctuaries of marble and gold to impress the empires of men. They carved them from the living rock, from the very body of the world, as if to say that the greatest truths are not constructed, but revealed from within. For centuries, we have searched for this hidden knowledge in fragmented texts and whispered rumors, believing it to be a lost philosophy, a suppressed gospel. We were searching for a what, but the secret they guarded in the silent, incense-filled darkness of their holiest chambers was not a what, it was a who. This is the moment of no return, the revelation that changes not just a story, but the very frequency of reality itself. The oral traditions passed from master to apprentice in the sacred cadence of Ge'ez, the chronicles that were never shared with the outside world, all converge on a single, earth-shattering point. They speak of the flight from Judea, of the Magdalene's journey south along the Nile, not as a solitary refugee, but as a protector. She was not fleeing to save her own life. She was fleeing to protect the future. Within the sanctuary of her body, she carried the living continuation of the sacred union. She carried a child, a daughter. Her name, they whisper in the quietest corners of the monasteries, a name that has been held like a pearl. In the heart of their tradition for 2 millennia was Sarah, the princess, and with that single name, the entire edifice of a 2,000-year-old religion begins to tremble. The story we have been told is a story of an ending, a final sacrifice upon a cross, followed by a spiritual resurrection that left the world behind. But the birth of a child transforms a story of an ending into a story of a beginning. It means the crucifixion was not the closing of a chapter, but the violent, world-changing event that set in motion the greatest secret mission in human history, to preserve the living embodiment of that sacred union on earth. The resurrection was not just proof of eternal life, but the catalyst that gave the Magdalene the time she needed to escape, to carry the light of a new covenant, not in a stone tablet or a scroll, but in the warmth of her own bloodline. This was the true threat, the truth so dangerous it had to be erased not just from history, but from the very possibility of our imagination. This forgotten legacy was never about establishing an earthly kingdom or a royal dynasty in the way our world understands power. The system that fears this truth can only think in terms of thrones and armies. But the wisdom preserved in Ethiopia speaks of a different kind of royalty. The child, Sarah, was not born to rule, but to radiate. She was the living synthesis of heaven and earth, spirit and flesh, the gnosis made manifest. She was a harmonic key, a human being whose very essence carried the balanced frequency of the integrated divine masculine and feminine. This bloodline was a continuation of a spiritual technology, a way of anchoring a new consciousness on the planet, a frequency of wholeness and unconditional love that, if allowed to flourish, would make the systems of control and division obsolete. They did not hide a princess. They hid a new potential for humanity. This revelation illuminates the deepest symbols of the Ethiopian tradition with a blinding new light. Have you ever wondered why the icon of the Black Madonna holds such power in these ancient lands, her dark, knowing face gazing out from 1,000 rock-hewn walls? The West sees her as the mother of the Nazarene, but the esoteric tradition sees a deeper truth. She is the archetypal symbol of Sophia, of the dark, fertile, life-giving womb of creation. She is the hidden icon of the Magdalene herself, the sacred mother who birthed the continuation of the light in the protective darkness. Of Africa, the Black Madonna is the guardian of the secret, the symbol of a sacred feminine power that did not just bear God, but continued to carry his living essence on earth through her daughter. The truth was never erased. It was encoded into their most sacred art, hidden in plain sight. The consequences of this revelation ripple outwards from the Ethiopian highlands, sending tremors through the hidden history of the entire world. This ancestral memory was not contained forever within its mountain sanctuary. It became a silent river flowing underground, nourishing secret springs of wisdom that would surface centuries later in the most unexpected places. It is the source of the legends of the Grail, which spoke not of a cup, but of a sangreal, a royal bloodline. It is the secret that fueled the gnosis of the Cathars in France, who revered the Magdalene and were exterminated for their heresy. It is the whispered truth that may have guided the Knights Templar, who had deeper connections to Ethiopia and who became the guardians of a secret so profound, the system had to destroy them. The Ethiopian tradition is not just one of many versions of the story. It is the source code, the original memory from which all these other echoes of a lost truth originate. We have arrived at the heart of the mystery, a truth so profound it has the power to heal the deepest wound in the collective soul. We now know what was hidden. We know why it was hidden, and we have spoken its name. The revelation of a child, a daughter named Sarah, is the key that unlocks everything. But a key is meant to open a door, and beyond that door lies another, even deeper question. A beginning implies a continuation. A bloodline is a river that flows through time. The greatest secret was not that a child was born. The greatest mystery, the one that the guardians have protected with their very lives, is what happened next. What became of the daughter of the light, the princess of a new covenant? After she was brought to safety in the heart of the mountains, did her sacred lineage survive? The story does not end in the high mountains. It begins there. The survival of this sacred bloodline, the continuation of this frequency through a daughter named Sarah, was not an act of hiding from the world, but an act of preserving a seed for it. The guardians of this knowledge understood a profound cosmic law. A truth can only be received when the consciousness of the receiver is ready to hold it. For 2 millennia, humanity was not ready. We were caught in the cycles of empire, in the dogma of separation, in a story that taught us to fear the very life-giving power that resided within our own souls. The Ethiopian highlands were not a tomb for a secret, but a womb, a protected space where this living potential could be nurtured, waiting for the great turning of the age, waiting for the moment of our collective awakening. That moment is now. This revelation is the final, missing piece of the great puzzle, the key that turns and aligns every other fragment of hidden knowledge we have uncovered. The whispers in the Gnostic Gospels of a beloved companion, the persistent legends of a Grail bloodline that haunted the dreams of Europe, the fierce reverence of the Cathars for the Magdalene, the symbolic guardianship of the Ark, and the enigmatic gaze of the Black Madonna. They are no longer separate mysteries. They are spokes of a great wheel, all pointing to this single, luminous center, a sacred union, a holy child, and a lineage of light that was carried into the heart of Africa and protected for us. The system did not fail to erase this truth. It was never destined to succeed. For while empires built their walls of stone and dogma, this legacy was being woven into the living fabric of an unbroken spiritual tradition, held in trust for the descendants of a world they knew would one day need it most. But this ancestral memory is not meant to be a historical artifact to be admired from a distance. Its return is a deeply personal summons. The story of the Magdalene and her child is a mirror, reflecting a truth that lies dormant within your own being. The sacred marriage of the masculine and feminine is not an event from the past. It is the great work of the present moment, the inner alchemy that you are called to perform within your own soul. The birth of the Holy Child is the potential that is born within you when you finally heal this inner division, when you allow your intuition to dance with your intellect, your heart to guide your will, and your spirit to fully inhabit the temple of your body. This knowledge was not preserved so that you could learn about a forgotten princess. It was preserved so that you could remember the sleeping sovereign within yourself. To reclaim this legacy is to begin the sacred act of healing the wound of separation that has defined our world. It is a conscious choice to step out of the narrative of control and into the reality of union. It is to honor the earth not as a resource to be exploited, but as the living body of the divine feminine. It is to see your own body not as a vessel of sin, but as a sacred ark, capable of housing the divine presence. This is the profound spiritual application of this recovered truth. It is a path of embodiment, a return to the ground of our being, a remembering that heaven is not a distant destination, but a frequency to be anchored here, in the fertile soil of our own reclaimed wholeness. This is the wisdom the Magdalene embodied, and it is the legacy her lineage was meant to protect. The river of this sacred bloodline did not vanish into the earth. It flowed on, a hidden stream of consciousness nourishing the soul of the world from below. Its journey is a story for another time, but its purpose has now been revealed. It was kept alive for you, for this moment, for the great rebalancing that is now underway on our planet. This knowledge returns now because enough hearts have awakened to recognize it not as heresy, but as a homecoming. The guardians have fulfilled their sacred trust. The story has been returned to the world, and now the guardianship passes to you. What does it awaken in you to know that the sacred story was never about an ending, but about a living continuation that flows into this very moment? If this truth resonates in the deepest chambers of your heart, if it feels like a memory you have always known, then your journey with us is just beginning. This channel is a sanctuary for the truths that are returning to the world. Subscribe and become part of a community that is choosing to remember. Share this revelation with those whose souls are ready to hear it, and become a guardian of this sacred flame. The greatest truths are not those that are taught, but those that are remembered from within. The story of the Magdalene is the story of the lost half of our own soul, and its return is the promise that we can finally, after centuries of exile, become whole once more. The time for silence is over. The time for remembering is now.